Okay, let's get started here. I see that some participants are joining us as we start. It is 1:15 p.m. And we will start with a brief introduction, and then I will give the floor to our speakers here. I would like to welcome all of you who are here today, participants, and welcome to Netherlands Day. This event is part of our Innovate or Die series. It is focused on recruiting and employer branding, as you can see on the screen. And this happens to be our first English-language Dutch event. Today, many of you are joining us from the German-speaking regions, and you may already be familiar with our online events. But this is the first of what I hope will be many Dutch events. Our next English language events after the Netherlands will be focused on the UK, and that starts in 2018. And as we get more people showing up, what I would like to do at the beginning here is for you to take a look at the chat window. On the right-hand side, you have your Citrix panel, and at the bottom usually is the chat window. I would just like to know that you can see my screen and that you can hear me okay. Just write a short note that you're here, and I will wait for maybe a couple of responses just to make sure that my PowerPoint here is visible and that my sound is okay. Let's see if maybe we'll get a couple more responses from incoming participants. Just a quick note in the chat window. Okay, should you experience any issues, I will talk about this in a few minutes. I will let you know how we can resolve any possible sound issues or visual. So this event, Netherlands Day, is powered by jobclipr, as you can see at the top there. jobclipr is a portal for employment seekers and for companies to make a digital business card. You create a personal brand and you use, among other tools, videos. It makes the recruiting process much more personal, as you can see the visualization of the employee's qualities and competencies. And another great feature is that businesses can post videos of their premises, of their current employees, and they can give future employees an idea of the culture that they would be working at. And videos are the most popular medium today, and jobclipr tries to use that medium to ensure quality placements and not just placements. All right, another thing I will mention at the start here is that with us today is Carmen, my colleague. I am the one you hear, and Carmen is the one you will not hear, but she takes care of everything going smoothly. A very important function, of course. And my name is Anna Anderson. I am the International Key Account Manager at HRM Leeds. And up on the screen, you can see my contact information. You will see it once again at the end. I would love to hear from you. I'd love to hear your feedback and to answer any questions that you might have. As I said, this is our first English language Dutch conference, and we would love to hear what the audience thinks, to provide exactly that kind of content that you want and that you need. So please don't hesitate to contact me. You can also follow me on Twitter, where you can stay updated on what's going on with our English language events. Sure, I post our German events there too, but I have to admit I'm a little bit biased. So that's me. Like I said, my contact information will appear once again at the end. And this brings us to a big HR topic here. This little image, it's a topic that affects both recruiting and employer branding, and that's the idea of big data. Everyone is talking about it. There is so much data out there, but as this nice little picture shows, we could have a gold mine of data, but if we don't know what to do with it or how to extract the data, it's useless. And this is something that will be addressed today. And this brings me to our first poll question that I would like you to answer. And very soon you will see that the question is, could your company benefit from optimization through the use of the following in your company? I'm sorry, in your recruiting and or employer branding efforts. And your answer choices, and you can answer multiple choices here. Yes, you could benefit from optimization with managing big data. Yes, with active sourcing. Yes, with developing or maintaining entrepreneurial culture. Yes, with video interviewing. And the last choice is no, or you're not sure if your company could benefit from that. So we will take a few seconds here for you to answer this question. And as soon as we have maybe 80% at least, we will see how many of you can benefit from what here. And I see that more participants are joining us as we speak. And as they join, they can just very quickly take a look at the question and maybe submit their answer right away. Okay, we'll leave it open maybe a couple more seconds and see the results. Okay, and the results here seem that the majority of you could benefit from optimization in active sourcing. And a very close second here, 43%, is managing big data, so a very hot topic. And we have, wow, this is very equally divided here. We've got 24% with developing or maintaining entrepreneurial culture, and we have 19% with video interviewing, and the last 24% who said no or not sure. It seems to me that you are in the right place. We've got something for you. And even those of you who said no or not sure, it's great to hear what the presenters have to say, because you never know. An idea might be shared that could work for your company or even just for your own professional development. All right, and a little bit about us, your organizers. As I mentioned, this WebCo is powered by jobclipr, but support is also offered by HR Networks. As you can see here, HR Networks is another one of our portals. It's been around since 2002, and some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with HR Networks, but one thing that is a more recent change is that we are doing more and more online events and kind of leaving the offline events behind, simply because online is so popular. Offline events require so much more effort, and with our online events, participants such as yourself can join from anywhere, and the best part, you join for free. And here you can see a tiny fraction of our clients. We work with all sizes of companies from around the world, and if you visit our website, you will be able to see a greater number of our clients in more categories. This slide was not big enough for me to fit all of our clients there. So please visit our website to see more. And that brings me to another question I would like to ask you. And my question here is, what is your role at your company? And I see the question was started here. Again, you can choose more than one choice here. Your choices are HR staff, HR service provider, a specialized department that is not HR, leadership, management, or board member, and then the other choice is other. So please make your choices. And again, if we have more participants joining us right now, we are in our second question, getting ready for our speakers to start here very soon. And let's see. So most of you are HR staff, 63%, and 17% HR service providers, 21% leadership, management and board members, and then only 4% from a non-HR department. And then we have 8% other. So once again, very focused here on HR. And a little bit about what's to be expected. We have a great program, a shortened summer program, but very interesting program with 2 presentations, each of them with 1 speaker. And last I checked, we had 90 participants, but it's not too late to invite your friends, your colleagues. You would just share the same link that you used to register, and they could quickly take care of that and join us today. And our audience comes from all over. We've got Austria, Belgium, Bulgaria, Germany, India, the Netherlands, Spain, Switzerland, and the UK. So we are a really international audience here today. And on the agenda, as you can see, I'm here speaking now. And soon after me, we've got Textkernel's representative, Mr. Marcel Wijngaard. And after him, we've got Mr. Gary Schoeniger, who's representing the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative, or ELI. And at the end, I will just jump in once again to say bye, and that will be it. And you can go on enjoying your August day. I mentioned earlier the chat window on the right-hand side, but in that chat window, only I and our team can see your questions. A great place to participate in the discussion, to ask questions, and to comment is our Brabble chat. And at the link below, or one that you can see in your chat window, you will be able to see other people's questions as well as ask your own. And the great thing is that you don't need to register. You can just go there and type away. And our presenters are ready for your questions, and they will gladly answer them at the end of their presentations. If you have any sound issues, please check the volume on your computer or on your headset. And if you have any more serious issues, such as breaking up or sound just disappearing altogether, please log out and log back in. And another option that you got in your registration email is joining via phone. And you got your access data in your confirmation email. And if you have issues even after that, please contact us via chat, and we will try to resolve it the best we can. And some organizational things, as you can see, I'm rushing a little bit because it's time for our next presentation to start, or our first presentation. This WebCo is live and it's being recorded, and after the event we will publish whatever material we have permission for. We will publish it on our channels. we will have the video and the presentation. And then if you're using social media, please use hashtag recruiting and employer branding when you post. And then we have a link for you where you can get a participation certificate. So then you really have proof that you were here. On a hot August day, you are developing yourself professionally. Our next presenter is joining us actually 9 hours behind us in time zones. It's a very early morning over there now. He's joining us from the US, and his name is Gary Schoeniger, just like I mentioned earlier. And he's a representative, actually CEO and founder of ELI, or Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative. And his topic today is creating or maintaining entrepreneurial culture. And I will let him tell you a bit about that. So enjoy. Welcome, Gary. Gary, I think that we cannot hear you. Could you just turn on your sound, please?
How's that? Better?
Oh, that's great. All right. Now,
okay.
Let's get started.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. It's 5:30 in the morning here in Seattle. I'm delighted to join all of you and share with you a bit about what we've learned about how to create innovative and entrepreneurial culture. So I'm going to turn my camera off for a moment so I can share with you my screen. So let's just get started. As Anna said, my name is Gary Schoeniger. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative. We focus on cultivating entrepreneurial mindsets. We work for educators, we work for corporations and governments around the world. So let's just get started. I'd like to just start this presentation with this quote to sort of level set where we're coming from. This is often attributed to W. Edwards Deming, the great systems thinker, but all organizations are perfectly designed to get the results they get. So let me just start with that basic premise. What we know from research from Gallup is that the vast majority of workers are not engaged in their work. This statistic is a global number. 87% of workers. You can look at the Gallup website, look at employee engagement data. They publish this on their website. The vast majority of human beings on this planet are not engaged in their work. Almost 1 in 5, Gallup describes as actively disengaged. And these are people that are bringing negativity to the workforce. They're paddling backwards, so to speak. So to me, this is quite an astonishing number that I don't really understand why there isn't greater concern about this or why this is tolerated. But in any case, it breaks down like this. As I said, almost 1 in 4 is actively disengaged. About 63%, almost 2/3, are just not engaged. And Gallup describes these folks as those who are just not likely to make any meaningful contribution to the organization's goals. And so there are about 13% that are actively engaged. So what I'd like to do is let me draw your attention to those that are actively engaged. I will argue that there's a small subset among the actively engaged that are hyper engaged. These are people that are creative, critical thinkers, that are resilient, resourceful, able to identify and solve problems on their own. They're very resilient. They're able to deal with whatever happens to them in their life. So these are what I call entrepreneurials. And I'm emphasizing the tail end of this word, the IALS, to emphasize that they don't necessarily own the business, but they are very innovative and entrepreneurial. They take it upon themselves to identify and solve problems in whatever environment they're in. So the question is, where do these people come from? How do we cultivate this sort of an attitude in our workers? That's really what I'd like to talk about. So when we look inside the mindset of an entrepreneurial, what we tend to find is there's a high perceived self-efficacy, which is the belief that I'm able to accomplish the goals that I set out to accomplish. There is an internal locus of control, the deeply held, mostly unconscious assumption that I'm responsible for my own outcomes, as opposed to someone who has an external locus of control, who has a deeply held, largely unconscious belief that fate, luck, or powerful others or circumstances dictate my fate. We tend to see a growth mindset, and this is a phrase coined by the famous psychologist at Stanford, Carol Dweck. People have either a fixed or a growth mindset. A fixed mindset is a deeply held, largely unconscious assumption that my talent or abilities are fixed. And so people with a fixed mindset are more likely to just try to show off whatever skills they have. These are people that will avoid doing things that will embarrass them or that will reveal any lack of ability. Where people with a growth mindset are more likely to set higher goals, they're willing to make mistakes, they're willing to try things. They believe that their abilities can be developed and enhanced through deliberate practice. We also see people who are in the entrepreneurial mindset, people who are intrinsically motivated. So that means they are not doing the work in exchange for money or to get prestige. They are motivated by the intrinsic value of the task itself, the intrinsic reward of the task itself. It's the highest possible level of motivation across a spectrum of motivation, which I'll talk about. They're also highly resilient. And this is a term coined by a guy at Penn in Martin Seligman in the world of positive psychology. And by resilient, what we mean is these are people who are able to bounce back from failure, setbacks, adversity, challenges. They tend to have an optimistic, explanatory style. So generally speaking, these are the characteristics we tend to see inside the mindset of entrepreneurials. So the question I would like to address is, how do we cultivate these characteristics in our workforce, right? How do we shift them from not engaged or disengaged to highly engaged? And how do we cultivate this mindset in our workforce? So I'm going to try to answer three fundamental questions. The first of which is, what is entrepreneurial behavior? The second question is, what are the underlying beliefs, assumptions, and the psychological needs that either encourage or inhibit the development of entrepreneurial behavior? And so lastly, what are the social, the environmental, and situational factors that either encourage or inhibit entrepreneurial behavior? So we're going to look at the process, we're going to look at the person, and we're also going to look at the situation, at the environmental factors that either encourage or inhibit the development of entrepreneurial behavior. So, part of the challenge we face in cultivating entrepreneurial behavior is that it's not really well understood. There's sort of a mysterious or a mystique that surrounds the entrepreneur. For much of the last century, we've more or less ignored entrepreneurship, and we very often look at the entrepreneur as sort of a maverick or a misfit, someone who just doesn't follow the rules and bucks the system, or so to speak. So we've not really studied the entrepreneur, and I really believe that we're at the dawn of an entrepreneurial revolution. And when we look at robotics, artificial intelligence, the rapid pace of the accelerated pace of change and complexity, we're at the dawn of an entrepreneurial revolution, one that requires everyone to learn how to think like an entrepreneur. Doesn't mean they're going to start a business. But we need everyone thinking out of the box with the capability to identify and solve problems amidst ambiguity and resource-constrained circumstances. So, just like at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, the idea of management was a great mystery. And so it was a practice that took, many decades to codify. And today we're at the dawn of an entrepreneurial revolution, and we still don't really understand what that means. The term is very narrowly defined and widely misunderstood. So when you hear the word entrepreneur, very often this is the type of image that comes to mind for many people. The Silicon Valley whiz kids, the wonder kind who, in his dormitory comes up with some big technology idea, gets venture capital investment, and, now they're billionaires. And so these are very high visibility examples of entrepreneurs, but they're not really representative of the typical entrepreneur. So we work with the Kauffman Foundation, and some of the researchers there determined that, these high growth venture-backed companies are by far the exception rather than the rule. In fact, less than 1% of all new ventures that are created in the U.S. every year start this way. So, these are highly visible case studies, but they just don't really accurately represent the reality, the day-to-day reality, the mindset and the methods of a typical entrepreneur. Some people hear the word entrepreneur and they imagine it evokes the idea of a small business owner, someone who owns a little shop that we pass by on the street. And so, we just equate the word entrepreneur with a business owner. And I'm saying that, yes, these could be entrepreneurial people. That's part of the entrepreneurial ecosystem. But these definitions and these images are very, very limited in terms of the broader picture of entrepreneurial people. So here's a little fun, some fun facts I wanted to share with you. In the research we've done, we found some research published by a guy from Harvard named Amir Bideh, who looked at the origins and evolutions of large established companies like Hewlett-Packard, like Walmart, like Microsoft. And he found that, which matches with our research quite closely, that we seem to have forgotten that even large established companies have what he called humble, improvised origins. And so here's the profile of a very successful, large, established company. There's no breakthrough technology. It's not based on intellectual property or a patent, right? They're doing something that's already being done. They're doing it better, bigger, faster, smarter, whatever. The founders themselves are not spending much time planning. And this always comes as great dismay to the business school professors who are encouraging students to write business plans. And that's, may be appropriate for large established organizations, but it's not what entrepreneurial people tend to do. Their market research tends to be ad hoc rather than formal market research. It tends to be face-to-face interaction, gut instinct, intuition, rather than a more formal approach to research, and we'll talk about that in a moment. The typical Inc. 500 company in the U.S., like Walmart, like Microsoft, like Hewlett-Packard, is started with about $10,000 U.S. They're not venture-backed. They're started with a relatively modest amount of money that's typically cobbled together from credit cards, mortgage, second mortgage, and friends and family contribution. This last statistic I find quite remarkable, that the founders of these companies, they don't have much experience. In the Harvard study, they found that the founders of these Inc. 500 companies, 40% of them, 40, had no experience whatsoever in their field, right? When Sam Walton started Walmart, he had no idea. He had no retail experience whatsoever, nor did Bill Gates when he started Microsoft. So the question we want to ask is how, right? So that's really the next question I wanted to bring forth. Ask yourself, how do we create a company around without having a big idea, without much formal planning, without much formal research, without much money, and without much experience? Like, how does that happen? And here is where I think many of us make a leap, what I would call a fundamental attribution error, which is we tend to, we tend to think that the entrepreneurial person just has some unfathomable abilities. They're born with some ability of some personality traits that we just can't seem to explain. We tend to make this attribution error that we attribute this behavior to a genetic predisposition or hereditary disposition rather than the person's mindset and their circumstances. So now I want to kind of jump into this first question: what is entrepreneurial behavior? And I want to sort of look at entrepreneurial behavior from a macro perspective as distinct from managerial behavior. And that's really important to understand entrepreneurial behavior as a distinct from managerial behavior. So I'm going to borrow from a concept developed by a man named Dr. George Land. It's called transformation theory. And it's a theory he used to describe the nature of change within a system. So I find this quite helpful to sort of disentangle entrepreneurial from managerial. So bear with me for a moment. This is sort of a macro perspective of entrepreneurial behavior. So what Dr. Land is saying is that there are three phases to life. There's a discovery phase, there's a delivery phase, and then there's an obsolescence phase, right? And what he's saying is that there's no avoiding these three. These are absolute facts of life that are unavoidable. What he is also saying is that each of these phases requires separate rules for survival. And the important thing is to know which phase you are in so you know which rules to apply. Because the rules for survival in phase 1 will cause problems in phase 2. The rules for survival in phase 2 will not apply to phase 1. So the trick is to understand how to adapt. So these red dots, and by the way, you can read about this theory in his book, which is very similar to the theme of this conference. His book is called Grow or Die by Dr. George Land. He then wrote a follow-on book called Breakthrough and Beyond, Breakpoint and Beyond. So the orange dots or the red dots represent moments in time when the rules for survival change. Okay, so that's all they represent. It's time to switch from one set of survival rules to another. So let's start with the discovery phase. What is it we are trying to discover? Well, to bring this into an entrepreneurial context, how does an organism connect with its environment? We're searching for a connection with our environment. Now, historically, we've done that by, as a young person, we figure out what it is we want to do for our career. We go on to college to get to school to get the degrees and learn about a career, and then, that's how we get our first job, and that's how we connect with our environment. In an entrepreneurial context, what we're searching for here in this discovery process is sort of what I would describe as the intersection between our own needs, our own abilities, and the needs of our fellow person, our fellow human, right? We're searching for a problem-solution fit. And that's really the important thing to discover. So to remember that we're searching for this problem-solution fit, and that orange dot represents the moment we sort of found something, we've discovered a problem-solution fit. It's also important to understand the environment in which this searching, this discovery process occurs. The search process is optimized in an environment with lots of uncertainty, which is what this yellow bar represents. So there's lots of uncertainty, and there's very limited resources, which is what the green bar represents, right? So it's a highly ambiguous, resource-constrained environment, which is an optimal environment in which to develop discovery skills. So discovery skills are observation and inquiry, experimentation and adaptation, what I call micro-experimentation, problem-solving, collaboration, teamwork, resourcefulness, networking, communication, commitment, and resilience. So these are generally and broadly speaking discovery skills. Once we find this connection, once we figure out we have evidence that we've created something useful, these skills become less relevant. We need to sort of tone down these skills, and we need to organize now. So this is where the management skills come in. Now what we need to do is stop searching and start replicating what we found in phase 1. And this is where the organization, the replication, the procedures, management, improvement, scalability, marketing, sales, it becomes formulaic, right? Everyone conforms. They comply to like predetermined roles, the division of labor, so that we can grow. The system must stop searching and start replicating so that it can grow. As a result of that growth, the uncertainty starts to come down and the resource access increases. Inevitably, invariably, a second breakpoint occurs when the environment changes, policy change, environmental changes, competitive changes, commoditization, a number of reasons, but the growth starts to slow. And that's how we've known we hit the obsolescence phase. So the obsolescence phase, ideally, we will recognize that the world has changed, that the environment has changed, and that we too must change. So what we're seeing here is a new S-curve beginning. So what's different is that the organism or the organization has now grown, has access to resources, and has very low uncertainty or ambiguity. So there's a different dynamic going on here. So this is what George Land calls a bifurcation. This is where the organization needs to diversify. This is large-scale innovation. This is about acquisitions, careful planning, in-depth research, experienced managers, access to resources, large visible markets, established channels, known customer, known brand. My point is quite simple, that most of us have been educated and function in column 2, that specifically from an HR perspective, we're in column 2, and that's where we live, and that's where our expectations are, that we're going to work in an organization where our day-to-day work is dictated by an HR person as a carefully prescribed a job description or role. So this is sort of, large-scale innovation. This is what we learn in business school. This is sort of what an MBA teaches us how to do in large organizations. And this is what entrepreneurials do. This is a different context, different attitudes, behaviors, and skills. So I just wanted to use this to demonstrate that entrepreneurial attitudes, behaviors, and skills are different from delivery skills or the skills required for large organizations to pivot and develop new products and services. So what I'm asking you to do here is to think of entrepreneurship as a discovery process. This is very simple definition. It's you think of a detective solving a mystery rather than a fortune teller or some mysterious gambler or whatever. It's a discovery process. So we're drawing from the best practices in design thinking here to teach people problem finding skills, which is very, very important, how to understand, how to tease out not only the functional dimensions of problems, but the social and emotional dimensions, how to conduct and design and conduct micro experiments, and how to advocate for and push ideas out into an organization. If we look at the history of innovation, most people reject good ideas in the beginning. And so it takes some agility and some communication skills and some resilience to be able to bring proven ideas to life. Good ideas do not sell themselves. So what are the underlying beliefs and assumptions and the psychological needs that drive or inhibit entrepreneurial behavior? So, as I mentioned in the beginning, our work is in understanding the entrepreneurial mindset, which I define here as the underlying knowledge structures and the cognitive processes that influence our behavior, most of which is unknown to us, which is underlying. Excuse me. A mindset is a way of thinking. It's a learned cognitive model that is acquired slowly and subtly over a long period of time as a result of experience. It's shaped by our environment and by our experiences, by our interpretation of those experiences. So I'm going to use the age-old iceberg idea. On the surface, we have the visible artifacts or the observable behaviors. Just beneath the surface, we have our explicit or declarative knowledge and our espoused values. This is what we say we value. This is the posters we put on the wall. This is the, the company motto or whatever. But what we don't often understand is the deeply held, largely unconscious, the implicit or procedural knowledge, the taken for granted beliefs and assumptions that are most often the true source of our behavior. So what shows up on the surface is not so much the results of our explicit knowledge, but more often from our procedural knowledge, our deeply held, taken for granted beliefs and assumptions, also known as culture. And this is based on the work of Edgar Schein, who studied culture at MIT. So in an entrepreneurial domain, we move people from a helpless to a mastery orientation. This is domain specific. So you can have, high efficacy, a mastery orientation in one domain and a helpless orientation in another domain. I just wanted to kind of put that out as a spectrum. Entrepreneurial behavior is learned just like any other skill. You start out at it, you're not very good at it, and through time, through repetition and feedback, you become more adept. So what are the social, environmental, and situational factors that encourage or inhibit entrepreneurial behavior? And this is sort of a connecting concept. There's two psychologists in Rochester, Deci and Ryan, that are sort of they're well-known researchers in the field of human motivation and self-determination theory. And this is adapted from their work. The basis here is that these basic psychological needs are autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Deci and Ryan would call it autonomy, competency, and relatedness. Right? So we need to have some sense of autonomy or control over our day-to-day life. Very important. We need to have a sense that we are competent, that we are good at something, that we have some kind of a skill or a domain that we have mastery of. And we need a sense of purpose. We need to this is relatedness. We need to see that our work matters, that we're recognized for our work. These are basic psychological needs. And when the environment supports these basic needs, that leads to greater choices, it leads to a greater sense of volition, it leads to higher motivation, and an increased sense of engagement, which leads to enhanced performance, increase in persistence, creativity, and problem solving. So there's both an environmental and a psychological component here. So let's look back at this delivery skill and the discovery process and try to understand why the entrepreneurs are so motivated, why they're so resilient, why are they so engaged. There's some contextual factors that we often overlook. The first of which is the nature of the goal itself that they're pursuing. When people are allowed to pursue the solution to problems they care about, they're much more likely to be intrinsically motivated than someone whose goal is just to simply collect a paycheck so that they can get to the weekend or what have you. The ambiguous and uncertain nature of the search process is the optimal environment in which to search. It cultivates the creativity, the resilience, and the resourcefulness. The resource-constrained nature, again, this creates a willingness to experiment. There's a bit of a naivete that is an advantage, and that's sort of a counterintuitive thing, but, I like to ask, like, how did it take us 40 years of commercial air travel before someone figured out to put wheels on a suitcase, right? There's a naivete that actually becomes an advantage. And lastly, the self-directed, the autonomous nature of the search. If we're allowed to spend some time and figure it out, we're much more likely to be resilient, to be resourceful, and to persist. So those are just situational factors that help explain the behavior. I mentioned earlier this concept of a fundamental attribution error, and I just wanted to bring this slide up to talk about the untapped potential we have in our organizations. The fundamental attribution error is the tendency to overemphasize the importance of traits while failing to recognize the importance of the situational factors that influence behavior. So this comes back to my initial quote. Every system is perfectly designed to get the results it's getting. And what we so often do is we blame the behavior on the apples and we ignore the barrel. And that's really this sort of a collective fundamental attribution error. We lament the lack of engagement, the lack of creativity, the lack of resilience and problem solving or whatever on behalf of our workers, and yet we fail to recognize the extent to which our systems, our organizational structures, and our culture, we fail to recognize the extent to which those factors inhibit the development of entrepreneurial behavior. So there are 4 things that we do to help create entrepreneurial culture in an organization, to develop workers who have a high self-efficacy, perceived self-efficacy, an internal locus of control, a growth mindset, people who are intrinsically motivated and highly resilient. So how do we do that? To move them from a helpless to a mastery orientation. There are 4 things needed to develop mastery orientation. This is from the famous psychologist Albert Bandura. We need internal champions. We need someone who believes in us, someone who advocates for us, who challenges us to dig deeper, jump higher, run faster. So there needs to be an advocate or a champion supporting the behavior. We need an early efficacy experience. And what I mean by this is we need to have an experience, a relatively early experience, where we feel the ball hit the bat, so to speak, to use a baseball analogy. And this early efficacy experience should not come too easily. It should come with some effort, not too much effort, not too much struggle, because they're likely to give up or get discouraged. But if it comes too easy, they're more likely to give up prematurely along the way. They need relatable social models, and this is so vital to our methodology that I want to point out. That the chances of someone adopting a new behavior is almost zero if they don't have relatable social models that they can see, people who are coming from similar or worse circumstances that are succeeding in this domain. So the relatable social model, what Bandura called vicarious models, role models, examples of people who are succeeding in this domain is vital. And lastly, self-regulation. And this is very, very important. what Bandura describes as the ability to self-regulate in the pursuit of a goal, to persevere in the face of challenges and setbacks, to learn from mistakes, to just manage our own emotional effects in the process of bringing ideas to life. This is not, easy. This is not easy work. It's rewarding, but it's just not easy, and it requires, what we're asking people to do to develop entrepreneurial attitudes and behaviors and skills. What we're asking them to do is deviate, right? And people talk about the importance of innovation, but they often fail to recognize what we're asking people to do is to deviate from their own behavioral norms, from their own familial, their own cultural norms, the norms of their own social circles. And that's not easy to do. And so when we're asking people to experiment and try new things, we're asking them to do things that are different, that are likely to be met with resistance also. And so how do we help people recognize just an effective resistance to change versus viable feedback and valuable feedback that helps make the idea stronger? So that's basically what our work is. We help organizations develop internal champions. We use a practice from the best practices of design thinking, a discovery process. We have a methodology that we teach, and then helping to identify and interact with local, relatable social models so we can see others that are succeeding in this domain, and we provide some tools to help the participants to self-regulate and also to develop an optimistic explanatory style. And this is really the key to resilience. And one of the interesting things that's come from the sciences here in positive psychology is what we know from the literature is that people who learn to optimistically interpret adversity become stronger, healthier, and happier than people who have never suffered adversity in the first place. It's really quite interesting science, but it really points out to why entrepreneurial people are so resilient. So that's really the overview of our work. Of course, it's very broad overview. Our work has been presented. We've trained thousands of educators, business and government leaders around the world. We conducted training programs throughout Latin America. We've done some work in Eastern Europe, in Russia, in Bulgaria, in Croatia, in the UK. We've done trainings in South Africa. Our work has been presented at the United Nations General Assembly in New York. It's been presented to the Papal Council for Peace and Justice at the Vatican and the European Commission in Brussels. So we've trained thousands of people to facilitate our programs. We have tens of thousands of participants have been through our online entrepreneurial mindset programs, and we also do curriculum consulting and corporate consulting to help people develop entrepreneurial culture. So I'm happy to connect with any of you offline. You can find me at gary@elimindset.com. And I'm on social media at @Schoeniger or at @Schoeniger, excuse me. So I'm happy to pause now and answer any questions that you might have in the chat box.
Okay, but maybe I jumped in a little earlier here. Thank you, Gary. That was a great presentation. Very popular topic there. we hear all this talk about employee engagement, but I think many don't have this know-how, how to awaken that. So we have I'm sorry, yeah?
No, that's just a really important statement that you're making, Anna. It's great advances in our understanding of motivation have occurred in the last 30 years. But what a lot of people don't realize is that, we're still operating on these deeply held cultural assumptions that are behaviorist. And meaning that we're going to, use carrots and sticks to motivate people.
Right.
I'm gonna pay you to do something, and that's the entirety of the motivation, and that's just a very primitive, ineffective way of motivating people. And so that's really sort of the underpinnings of a lot of our work.
All right, and I think that will kind of go well with one of the questions that we have here. So here we've understood that it's not enough to just kind of give these external rewards. And you talked about some of the beliefs, assumptions, and needs that encourage entrepreneurial behavior. But can you tell us what discourages entrepreneurial behavior?
Yeah, so that's good. Thank you, Anna. So just briefly, I mean, that's important to bring up because there are psychological and situational enablers, and there are psychological and situational disablers. So, for example, social pressure is enormous. We know from social psychology that social pressure is by far the greatest influence of human behavior. Social pressure renders personality traits more or less irrelevant. So if no one around you is behaving this way, it's much less likely that you'll behave this way. Deviating from cultural norms is really, it's a powerful psychological disabler. Right? Low self-esteem, low self-efficacy, those are other examples of psychological disablers.
Mm-hmm. All right. And I have another one that is actually very similar to that. Let me just read it here. And we're talking about, so here you talked about the beliefs, assumptions, and psychological needs that encourage this behavior. And now we have another question that's similar in that it says social, environmental, and situational factors. So you talked about the ones that encourage. Can you provide some examples that would discourage entrepreneurial behavior?
Yes.
So again, so now the social, environmental, and situational. I'm sorry.
Right. So just a moment ago, I addressed some of the psychological factors that might inhibit. And now I want to talk about environmental factors. And so, social pressure is sort of an environmental factor, but it affects us, psychologically. But another environmental factor is, it's really quite simple once you hear it. This comes from a cognitive psychologist named Gary Klein. If those of you are inclined to look at his research. But when we put people in an environment where there's an emphasis on adhering to the rules and following procedures, you're just much less likely to have insights in that environment. And like once you think about it, it becomes quite obvious, right?
All right.
But when we're over focused on following the rules, following the procedures, doing exactly as you're told, you're just not likely to have insights or come up with new ideas.
Absolutely. Okay. And I see some more questions coming up here. one says, how would one adapt to a company situation? And the examples here are, for example, a turnaround. I'm guessing maybe turnaround of employees? Or?
I think probably turnaround is like a company's in trouble and it needs to like change.
Oh.
Right. I'm going to assume that's the definition.
All right, the posed question says turnaround versus startup here, and you assumed correctly. I got response from the participant.
Okay,
Thank you.
Okay. So a turnaround is more about the column 3 behaviors, but I want to be clear about this. We also teach small teams how to do that. We work with like management teams to like innovate, to understand both the functional, the social, and emotional needs of our customers, and how to tease out the unarticulated needs of customers. So how to use these discovery skills to as part of a turnaround is to recognize new opportunities. That's really what the entrepreneurial mindset is capable of recognizing new opportunities. I'm so glad this question came up because it's really what you're talking about. The turnaround is the difference between column 2 and column 3. So in the turnaround, we recognize, well, we can't just keep doing what we've always done. We need to diversify. We need to bifurcate. And their entrepreneurial attitudes, behaviors, and skills are essential there. But very often in an organization that has been so focused on column 2 that the organizational, the innovative culture, the entrepreneurial culture is gone from the organization. The organization has been so focused on just replication for so long that the innovative and entrepreneurial culture needs to be sort of revitalized. I hope that's helpful.
All right. And we have another question here. It looks like the audience is really interested in this subject. So we have, is it possible to leverage personality tests such as the MBTI, the DISC, and Rice profile?
To figure out who are the innovators and entrepreneurials among us? I was going to assume that's the nature of the question. That can we use personality profiles to determine, who are the innovators and entrepreneurials among us?
Yeah, that seems to be the question.
Okay. So it's a very good question. And my answer might be a little bit counterintuitive, but broadly speaking, I'm going to say no. And I know that sounds counterintuitive, and I no might be too strong of an answer. Maybe I would say proceed with extreme caution. And this is where I will take you back to the world of social psychology. We know how people will predict, how we can predict how people will behave in known circumstances, but we don't really know how people will behave in uncertain, ambiguous environments. So I'll tell you one story, an example of this. There's a city in the United States, a fairly large city, Albuquerque, New Mexico. The mayor of this town decided to put hundreds of his city government workers through our entrepreneurial mindset training program. And there was one guy who was a sanitation supervisor who oversaw the garbage trucks that pick up trash. All right, so this is a city government worker, right? We're not thinking entrepreneur here. And this man was very resistant to taking this course. His boss said, you have to go take this course. He did not want to take the course. But once he got into it, he realized that he could treat this as if it were his own business. And he started to say, okay, you know, what he's got the people on his team and said, what problems do you see? What frustrations do you encounter in the day? And how can we solve these problems? So, and all of a sudden they figured out, well, we're losing money picking up recycled trash. And so let's try to resolve that. Let's try to reduce the loss. And they got us to where in some months they actually make money picking up recyclables where they were losing money. So what I want to come back to is talk about the idea that non-entrepreneurial behavior is learned. I want to say that again. Non-entrepreneurial behavior is learned. Not everyone wants to start a business per se, but as humans, we are all driven by the same basic psychological needs to be engaged in work that matters, to have a say in our work, to be able to contribute to our work, to be able to see our work impacting the lives of others. And when we are in an environment that supports that activity, human flourishing is likely to occur.
All right. Thank you for that answer. Let's go to the next question here. All right. Can you provide some examples of where you have implemented these ideas? So maybe some practical examples.
Yeah, well, so one is in the example I just mentioned in Albuquerque city government. And I like to use that example because when you think of government workers, you think about the polar opposite of entrepreneurs, right? It's just, you know, it's sort of like counterintuitive. We think of this, you know, government workers as people who are not really engaged and, you know, not really, so that's one example. There are many corporations have involved, large insurance companies, banks, large nonprofit organizations. We just did a big training for a nonprofit in South Africa, in Cape Town, the Alan Gray Orbis Foundation. We trained their entire staff, who are now going to take our programs across Africa. I think we're going to go back and do a Pan-African training in 2018.
I'm sorry. Can I jump in with another question there? How long does one such training take?
So we can do sort of a one-day quick executive level overview. We can train, the optimal training is a 3-day training program where we come in and work with you know, internal champions, take them into the process, give them the tools necessary to cultivate this behavior in others. And so, Anna, there are two different ways we can go with this. One is we can work with a small team of managers in more of the sort of the diversification, the turnaround situation. We can teach people best practices and design thinkings, how to identify, evaluate, and bring new opportunities to life. And there's another direction is where we can train managers how to just inculcate these attitudes throughout the organization. So everyone is encouraged to just look around them, figure out what's not working, what can be improved, what's missing, so everybody in the organization can be innovative and entrepreneurial in the organization. So two different sort of paths. The 3-day training is the optimal, and with the leave behind tools, we have leave behind programs that we can then, the internal champions can facilitate throughout an organization.
Okay. And taking a quick look at the time, it seems like that we're going to have to stop the questions here. And again, if there are additional questions for Gary, I'm sure he will be happy to answer them via email or however you choose to contact him. You have his contact information up here. And Gary, thank you again for this great presentation. And I hope...
Thank you, Anna, and thank you all for your time.
Thank you. I hope that we will see Gary at our future events here. And that brings us to 3:30 here, and we will conclude this thing in just a second here. You will see my screen again. All right. And this was actually our, like I mentioned at the beginning here, our first Dutch web conference. And this was actually a mini one. Typically, our web conferences, our full-length web conferences, have 6 to 8 presenters. And it's a great opportunity to, you know, without moving from your chair, you get to see 6 to 8 experts or people from the field who have something valuable to share. So please join us for our next events. More are definitely coming up in the Netherlands, soon after that the UK, and who knows where else. You can see our upcoming web conferences at this link here, our bit.ly link for WebCos. We have other topics. It's not just recruiting. We've got HR software, best practices. We have insurance and marketing and sales and so on. And also, in addition to participating in the audience, if you think that you would like to be one of our future speakers, I'm once again the person to contact for that. Please get in touch with me and we will talk. And I believe that this is it for today. So once again, thank you to both of our presenters, and thank you, audience members, for sticking around on August 3rd, when many people are on vacation. And I wish you a great rest of the day, and I'll see you at our next event.